think the rise of RISC-V would seriously change the market for x86 and ARM architectures, and maybe provide China an opportunity to catch up or even outrun foreign chips?
I think it's great. We came from a world of proprietary architectures like Spark and Power and x86. Then we went to a world of licensable technology such as ARM, both for proprietary architectural designs as well as licensed complete hardened designs from ARM. The natural next step is completely open source designs, and RISC-V is doing the right things. If you think about the adoption curve of that kind of technology, it will start as IP in embedded designs. For example, a lot of artificial intelligence accelerators over the next 3 years will evolve to become SoCs, which means you've got to have a CPU on the chip or at least on the package. Well, 3 years ago, that CPU would have been an ARM licensed CPU. Now that will become a RISC-V design because it's freely available. And that gives SoC designers a new option, more affordable option. That works great for things like embedded CPUs on an SoC, such as a mobile handset, which are today predominantly ARM-based. I would be surprised if that doesn't shift and we start seeing RISC-V penetrate those the embedded CPUs in SoCs for everything from mobile handsets to AI accelerators, to things like FPGA integrated platforms with hardened logic, which could include CPUs and acceleration engines along with the programmable engines. They're not necessarily wedded to ARM. Could they switch to RISC-V? Yeah, when it becomes adequately competitive and hardened, so that you have the reliability and availability and serviceability needed for those kind of platforms. It will evolve, and it will approach, perhaps not meet, but will approach the capabilities of ARM, certainly in the next 5 years. The last place that technology will materialize is in data center platforms, potentially competing with x86 from Intel and AMD, with ARM-based platforms from companies like Amazon AWS. Could they do a RISC-V? Absolutely, they could. Today, it would not be competitive. That's a statement of ecosystem, even more so than semiconductor readiness. It'll take 10 years for the ecosystem to evolve for using general purpose computational applications like cloud services and things like that. But eventually it will happen. I think it will probably happen first in China, where there's a lot of motivation and incentive to have indigenous designs, not licensed to a UK-based firm, or acquired from, as hardened logic, from a US-based firm. So I think the move towards an indigenous semiconductor industry in China will give more impetus to RISC-V, and it will become a viable platform for the data centers sometime in the next 5 to 10 years.
What challenges do you think RISC-V faces? Is it building the ecosystem?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think it's the ecosystem. I'll give you another analogy. It's helpful to learn from analogies. One could argue that AMD's GPUs are competitive with certain respects, especially high performance computing, versus NVIDIA. Okay, take that as true. Then why doesn't NVIDIA market share suffer from AMD's chips? And the answer is not the chip, it's the ecosystem. Jensen Huang told me he spends in excess of $250 million a year just on his proprietary supercomputers to give his engineers a competitive advantage. And it creates both an internal development capability and an external ecosystem magnet that draws in researchers from around the world, that draws in companies and innovators from around the world to build on that platform. Are there better platforms? Yeah, for certain applications. One could argue that some of the startups and even Intel's Habana Labs might have a better platform. But the ecosystems around those will take 5 to 10 years to develop. it takes a lot of time and a lot of resources to develop an ecosystem. But the one thing it takes to start that process is a competitive advantage. There has to be an economic driver to switch an architecture. That economic driver can't just be measured in percentages, 25% better, 50% better. It has to be an order of magnitude better to cause an ecosystem to shift from, let's say, Spark to x86, right? And that economic benefit was total cost of ownership. Today, because of the dramatic importance AI is playing, it takes more than just a TCO advantage. It takes raw performance, right? I mean, to match the performance of your brain in a computer, we're still 3 to 4 orders of magnitude slower with the fastest GPUs we have today. And so the goal of all these companies is to close that gap. So it's all about performance. And then after you get the performance, that'll be about lowering price and so forth. So it's all about performance. Once you have the performance, now I've got a magnet to draw in an ecosystem, to draw in the developers and the researchers that can begin to plant the seeds of that ecosystem to grow. But without a competitive advantage today in performance, that ecosystem growth is going to be very expensive and take quite a long time.